Hi, I'm Father Roderick, and in this video, I'm going to share some of my personal tips that have allowed me to read one book per week for the rest of the year. Now, I don't know if you are like me, but at the beginning of every new year, I have this same New Year's resolution. This year, I'm definitely going to read more books. And then at the end of the year, well, it just never happened. But this year is different. I wanted to read more books, but I also did some research on how to make it happen. And I changed some of my behaviors to ensure that I could actually meet that goal of reading one book per week. So I will share with you these tips. Hopefully it can help you to do the same if you have that ambition. And to show you that it's not just a New Year's resolution, I have already read 7 books in less than 3 weeks this new year. So I'm definitely on to something. Subscribe to the channel if you like these videos and hit the bell button if you want to get notified when there's a new video or a live stream. Let's dive in. Like many of you, I have an account on Goodreads, and that means that I get notified of what my friends are reading. And at the beginning of this year, I got a number of notifications from friends that said, hey, I'm going to do this book challenge where I'm going to read, 15 books this year, or I'm going to read at least one book every month, which in my opinion was already very ambitious. And then I saw someone who said, I'm going to read one book per week, so I'm going to read 52 books. And my first reaction was, that's impossible. And then I thought, well, maybe, what if it's not? And the first reaction that I got from friends to which I pitched this idea, well, hey, I'd like to read 52 books this year, was, well, why should you? I mean, that means that you have to rush through these books or skim through the pages, whereas books are meant to be enjoyed and savored. Why would you engage in this kind of literary gluttony? Well, the reason that I want to read 52 books this year or more is that I loved reading, and this is what I did when I was a kid. When I was in primary school, I would go to the library every single day, except on Sunday when the library was closed, and I would read either there or I would take books home, and sometimes I would read throughout the night. My parents hated me for that, but I would read until, 4 o'clock in the morning because I just couldn't stop reading. The reason that I love reading so much is that it helped me. I'm usually very easily stressed. It helped me to relax, to step away from everything that's urgent and everything that stresses me out, and it puts me in the lives of people that have totally different priorities, people that are saving the universe or the galaxy, and that remind me that there is more to this life than just the stuff that is on your calendar and the obligations or the homework at school. And so I love to read fantasy books. I've read so much Tolkien, science fiction, basically anything, Roald Dahl, anything that could bring me to a world where my imagination was without limits. Another thing that I love about reading is that I'm in control of what this world looks like and what these people in the book look like. And in that respect, it's a much more active way of consuming stories than watching TV or playing video games or even, VR experiences. Because all those newer media, they present me with the world that someone else came up with. Whereas when I read a book, I can paint that world the way I see it in my mind's eye, and I love that. So reading, I know, is good for me, and it is, in that respect, a bit similar to praying or meditation or going for a long walk. It winds you down, and it opens up your soul and your imagination. And I can already tell that my newfound rhythm of reading one book per week has that effect on me. I don't want to go back to the time that I was just watching TV. Here are some of my personal tips. The first one is set a goal. Pick something that you think you can realize, and don't be too careful. If you set a goal, if it's a little bit above what you think you can do, it will motivate you to work harder. if I want to run a marathon, I'm not going to train for a half marathon, right? I'm going to train for a marathon, and that will motivate me, incentivize me to do a lot of running and a lot of training and take it very seriously. So I set myself a goal of reading 100 pages per day. Now, why 100? Because I measured my reading speed. There are some tools that you can find, some apps that will do that. And so it's like, so if I have 2 hours or 2.5 hours that I can find throughout the day to read, how many pages can I, in ideal situations, can I read? Well, it turns out for me, that's 100 pages per day. So that's what I set as a goal. And that is a lot. And it will allow me to, if I read shorter books, to read more than one book per week. The reason that I picked 100 pages is that I want to read the entire Wheel of Time series, which is, I think, more than 12 books. And every book is about 600 pages. So I was like, well, if I want to finish this, 100 pages per day, that will allow me to read more books than just the Wheel of Time series. So that's why it's pretty high for me. The second tip that I have is, and that works really well for me, pick a time to read that is sacred. Maybe not one specific moment of the day. Not everyone has the kind of life where they can set apart 2 or 3 hours to read. But if you can't do it in one session, then try to find more moments during the day, 2 or 3 sessions, one early in the morning when, I don't know, you've just woken up but you don't want to get out of bed yet. Read something there. Read during your lunch breaks. Perhaps even do a combination of written books or books on electronic books and audio books, especially on the Kindle. You can synchronize those two. So you could, when you're in the car, you're in a commute, you can you can listen to the story, and then you can read on paper, which of course is much faster when you get back home. My sacred time is when I get back home from work around 5 or 5:15. The first thing I do is I pour myself a cup of tea, and I sit in the main living room. I turn down all my devices, and I read until I get hungry. And but I could also sometimes I have to do some homework, or I have to clean the kitchen. Then I will read another hour just before I go to bed, and I sacrifice some of my TV and video game time in favor of reading those 100 pages. My third tip, I've already mentioned it, is to block out all distractions. Don't fall for the temptation to check your email or your Facebook or Instagram. Put your phone away. Turn it off. Put it on, in-flight mode. Don't try to listen to other stuff, to put the radio in the background or turn on the TV. That will all distract you. What you want to have is laser focus on the book, and the less distraction there is, the better, the faster you're going to read, and the more you will be immersed in the story itself. So block out all of those distractions. For me, that is a reason to always read on my Kindle and not on my iPad or on my phone, because the mobile devices, once they're hooked up to the internet, they keep, blinking and distracting me with all sorts of notifications. When I read a book, it's my Kindle and my Kindle alone, and that device is so boring and so slow that there's nothing on that device that distracts me. My fourth tip is don't hesitate to apply some of the speed reading techniques that you can learn about on YouTube or in blogs. However, one caveat, a lot of those speed reading techniques don't work. People that are boasting, we read 400 or 500 pages a day, or they tell you that they can read at incredible superhuman speeds. What they're actually doing is skimming. They don't remember everything that's on the page. So, but there are also some elements in those speed reading techniques that you can apply and won't won't reduce your reading to skimming pages. One thing that really helped me was to set very large margins on my Kindle, so there's a lot of white room on the page. The reason being that the less my eye has to move back and forth, the more I can just grasp multiple sets of words at once. Now, the way that we read is we don't read word by word. There's this one app that you can have. I think even that Amazon implemented it on some of their Kindle Fire devices, where it will show you one word after another very, very rapidly in the center of the screen. The idea being, well, hey, if you don't have to move your eyes, then your brain will be able to go so much faster through these words. The thing is, that doesn't really work that well, because when you're reading, when you're a fast reader, you don't read all the words. You pick the words that have the most meaning. And the more experience you have in reading, the more your brain will be able to select words that really matter. And your mind fills in the blanks. It's amazing to see how that works. It's actually like our vision. When we see something, the only thing that we really see very well is the center of our vision. And the rest is extremely blurry. Just try it out. Look at the words and then try to read something on a book that you keep here. You won't be able to see it because it's all blurry. However, your mind tells you that everything around you is in focus, but it's not. Our brain is very good at filling in the blanks, and that's also true when it comes to reading. The more you read, the faster you will grasp what the paragraph or the page is about, and your brain will fill in the blanks. And so one of the techniques that I use when I read big books like for instance, The Wheel of Time, I do selective skimming. So there are pages where the story gets very dense and it's very important. Once that happens, I slow down. I was like, oh, there's something really important happening. But there are also a lot of events in these books that are, I just go through it. I kind of have a mental picture of what's happening. They're traveling through, a landscape. And I don't really need to know all the little details of that particular part of the journey. I could if I wanted, but then reading that book would take me 3 or 4 weeks. Actually, the first book in the series, The Eye of the World, that took me almost a year to read because I was like savoring every single page. But now that I know how this particular writer writes, I know that there's a lot that I can just skip through, and I will read enough to paint this mental image. But once I get to the action, once I get to the important parts, that's where I slow down. So that's something I learned from speed reading. And then a final thing that I learned from speed reading is don't go back. Sometimes you read a page and then you realize, well, hey, my mind was elsewhere. The temptation is to go back and reread it and to read it even slower. But what I've learned is that doesn't really help. What actually helps me to focus more is if I notice that my mind starts to drift, to read even faster. Because then my brain has to hold on to. This is not something you can do for hours, of course. But the moment I notice that I get more distracted, I speed up my reading technique, and I certainly don't go back. But because 9 in 10 times, if I miss something or it's like I was distracted, when you continue the story, things will fall into place and you will start remembering, oh, of course, that's probably what happened. And so again, your brain will fill in the gaps. My fifth personal tip has to do with reading audiobooks or listening to audiobooks. Just as much as you can learn certain things from speed reading, you can also learn how to speed listen. And this is not always possible, but a lot of the apps that we use to listen to audiobooks enable you to increase the listening speed. Now, this is something that also sometimes people apply to podcasting. If they want to, they don't have much time, but they still want to check out a couple of their favorite podcasts, they will just up the speed. Also, depending on how fast someone talks, you have very slow talkers where you can easily speed it up 2 times and you will still totally understand what they say. But you also have people that, like me, speak very rapidly, and then maybe you cannot, do like 2 times reading or listening speed because it's too much. It's too much info too rapidly. But what I've noticed is that a lot of the audiobooks have a very kind of a normal reading pace, which is almost the same for all audiobooks that I've listened to. What I've noticed is that you can also start to speed listen. And the trick to do that is to gradually up the speed. If you can do an experiment where you listen to an audiobook and then you put the speed to twice the speed. And at first you're like, who can listen to this? Well, it's because the shock is too big. What I did is my first step was, let's speed it up to 1.25. And then I listened to a chapter like that. Like, well, almost no difference. And then I go back to just a regular speed. And I was like, wow, this is slow. And then I up it to 1.5 times the speed. And I listened to a chapter like that. And then I drop back to the original speed. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is so slow. And I could up it all the way to twice the speed. That's the maximum amount of let's say, acceleration that my audio app allows. But I've heard that for Audible, you can go all the way up to 3 times the speed. You have to kind of pick and choose what works for you. It also depends on the type of book that you read. But right now, I'm reading a trilogy that's a young adult novel series. And, well, twice the speed, no problem whatsoever. But it cuts the amount of time that I need to read those books in half. Instead of listening 8 hours to an audiobook, I can read it in 4 hours. And on a Saturday, for instance, or when I go for a walk on Sunday, I can read an entire book. I can listen to an entire audiobook in just 4 hours. And thanks to training my brain to speed up the listening speed. My 6th tip is, if you ever drop the ball, if there is a day where just life ran with it and you couldn't find time at all to read, look for the first occasion to double your efforts. Don't think, and it's very similar to, let's say, trying to lose weight or training for a marathon or whatever sports. If you drop the ball, that's not a disaster. What would be really a shame is if you give up and you think, oh, well, I'll never make it. No, just go back, focus again, try to find some extra time and catch up. So if I drop the ball now, and there have been days that I couldn't read, or only a tiny little bit, just half an hour, well, the next day I try to skip something like, for instance, watching TV. And instead of that, I read an extra hour so that I still, in total, I would have read 100 pages every day of that week. And it is the almost a penalty of having to spend more time or reserve more time for catching up also enhances the habit of reading every day, because in the back of your mind is like, well, I cannot drop the ball because then tomorrow, well, I'll have to read twice as much. My final tip, number 7, is the most important one, and that is read only what you love. If you are reading a book and after 2 or 3 chapters, don't give up too soon. Sometimes the beginning of a book is a bit boring, but gradually you'll get into it. But after a number of chapters, you're like, well, I don't like this writing style. I don't like this story. I don't like these characters. Stop it immediately. Your time is way too precious to read things that you don't enjoy. Just put the book away and immediately start reading another book. The way I do this, if I start reading a book and I didn't like it that much, and I fell behind because of that. Say, for instance, I invested 100 pages on that book that I ultimately ended up not liking. I'm picking for that week, I'm picking a smaller book so that I can still meet my goal of reading 1 book that week. But instead of reading like an entire a book of The Wheel of Time, I'll just read, I don't know, a short novel of 300 pages or something like that. So that in the end, I can still meet that goal of reading 1 book every week. If you like these tips, if you have some more, I'm sure that some of you are very experienced readers, otherwise you wouldn't watch this video. Let me know if you have some additional tips in the comments, because I have just started this process and I'd love to discover more ways to enhance my reading. So please, if you have a tip or you have some experiences yourself, Tell me how you read books and how you meet that goal that you set yourself. If you have a goal, by the way, if you want to challenge yourself, share your goal with us in the comments. And as a community, we can support each other and motivate each other to keep reading. If you like this channel, again, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell button. And if you are interested in my other YouTube channels, by all means, check them out. I also have a channel that is called Father Roderick Stories, and that is where you can find my vlogs and my documentaries. And I have a special YouTube channel for my Lego content, and you can find that by searching for Father Roderick Builds. And what I do there is I do a lot of live building and chatting with my audience, and it's always a ton of fun, but only, of course, if you like Lego. You can also follow me on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, social media. Just look for Father Roderick, and fatherroderick.com is my website. Finally, if you want to support my work, if you want to help me financially to create these videos, and sometimes I have to pay for my equipment, like for instance this camera that I'm currently using, then consider becoming a part of the Patreon community by going to patreon.com/fatherroderick. And as a thank you to my patrons, there are some perks, one of which is a special podcast that I record every week just for my patrons, and there's nowhere else on the web that you can find that content. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for subscribing and liking and sharing, and I will see you next time.